I welcome everyone for this particular session that we will discuss about writing the research papers. So this is mainly focused for the research scholars or students or those faculties, those who are looking for applying for PhD or those who are pursuing PhD and struggling for publications, right? So we try to cover here a comprehensive guide on writing the research papers. The outline of this talk is to cover about more in detail how to write a research paper, right? So writing the research paper starts with doing the research first, because without doing the research there is no point of writing the paper, right? So firstly, any researcher has to identify a research problem of his choice, and which is most recent and which has a market value. I mean, there are a lot of buyers for it and there is a demand for it, right? So once the research problem is identified, we will discuss about the literature review, right? So what is needed, right? So generally, when we identify the research problem, we start writing a review paper first. The idea behind writing a review paper first is to grab in-depth knowledge about the existing literature review, about the identified research problem, if there are any gaps that we can address, and then we can start doing the actual research. So the next phase after literature review is planning and executing the research. There we have to plan each and everything in detail, and once the plan is frozen, we have to go and look for the execution of the research, right? Once the entire research has been executed or it is up to the satisfactory, and when we satisfy ourselves that and our supervisors that the research outcomes are substantial, then we can enter the writing process for reporting the outcomes to the journals, conferences, or maybe any publication platforms, right? So when we start that, we have to identify the scope of the paper first. What's going to be there in the paper? So we'll discuss each and every point in very much in detail. Once we do that, we have to look for a journal and conference selection. That what would be the target journal that we want to attempt for this, or what would be the target conference that we want to go and present the research, right? So once it is done, then we have to start building the first draft of the research. That will discuss each and every point. Generally, it starts with title, authors, affiliations, and their orders and other things. Later, abstract, introduction, part of the existing work which can be included in the literature review, and subsequently which can be included in the literature review, and subsequently contribution is a proposed model, methodology, or is there anything like such as, let's say, strategies, algorithms, uh, proposed model, methodologies, right? Different things. Once that's the core section of my paper or anyone's paper, right? Contributions. What are the research contributions that goes under that section? Subsequently, results and analytical discussions would be provided in the subsequent section, and then finally we will have to conclude with a future scope. After the future scope and conclusion, mostly we can end up with a conclusion. Also, future scope generally is a part of a thesis, not of a paper, but we can conclude the current studies and the outcomes if we have found out, and then the references and acknowledgement. Later we'll discuss about the characteristics of the dull paper, because we have to understand which one is a dull paper, right? So what are the characteristics of a dull paper? Then we can easily identify where we stand, and once we identify it, we should be able to enhance our paper further, right? And once the first draft is ready, the second phase would be the revision of the first draft. That could be multiple revisions, okay? That would be multiple revisions. It's too many multiple revisions. And once all the rigorous revisions are performed, including the review with a supervisor or maybe other colleagues or collaborators, whoever they are, then we have to submit it to a conference or a journal, right? And once it is submitted, there could be a rejection, there could be major, minor revision, how we handle those, how we respond to the reviewers, how we take it forward further. All these things we will discuss one by one. So that was the larger outline of of our this last session. Correct. So first and foremost question before we start writing a research paper, we have to ask ourselves that is my problem novel? If the problem is not novel, there is no point of doing and executing the research further. And eventually, even if we write it, it may not be accepted to the higher quality journals or Q1 journals. It may be end up in publishing in getting published in low quality journals or conferences, but not in a high quality Q1 level journals, right? So we have to always think that is my problem novel. Can we think of something that solves the fundamental problem, and we have to identify an unoccupied slot for publishing. So let's say if problem is already been solved, there are a lot of existing research, a lot of existing papers and researches available, and there is nothing much to do on this. There are no buyers. No one is going to buy that because we got to sell our ideas, right, in terms of publications and other things. So we have to always think that, am I solving a fundamental problem and giving a solution to the larger audience, right? So if there are already there is already a lot of research conducted, and there are too many papers already been published on the same problem, it's better to drop that problem and find the another one, because it would be difficult to publish. Or the problem is not novel, so we have to identify something which is novel, that is not a lot of work is done so far on that, and then we have to put our work as in a slot and then publish, right? So whenever we find out a problem, we have to look at what are the missing points and shortcomings of the published work. Let's say if I found out a problem, I found out the problem is novel and there is a scope of publication for me. The next step is the missing point. I have to look for the missing points or the gaps, research gaps in the existing work, or if there are any shortcomings which are not being addressed in the published work. And then from that, I can propose my work overcoming those limitations or shortcomings or gaps, and propose the enhanced solution or that kind of novel solution I can propose. So we should not start doing the research even unless we have answered these questions. Once we answer those questions, we should start executing, because at some point of time going forward, we will be stopped and we'll find that there is no scope or no publishing in that particular field because it's been already done a lot. So we have to rethink and plan before we start even the research, not even just the writing part, but we have to think and plan nicely even before we start the research work, because once we work, then we write. So we have to plan it nicely. So our first job is to identify a novel research problem, right? So this is the first and foremost thing for a PhD student or any researcher, right? Even if we have a degree of PhD, if we are trying to publish the papers for our professional growth, first and foremost question would be asked by the reviewers is the novelty claim. The first and foremost question is the work original and novel? Correct. It should not be kind of an incremental work, just a little bit of tweaks here and there, and then there is a publication. It may go through in a lower quality journals or conferences, which is fine. But if you're targeting some sort of high quality journals, then incremental works are generally getting rejected very quickly, right? So, and the work which we do, it should last for a longer duration, right? And it should have a long lasting impact. Such as, let's say, an example of 6th generation of wireless communication. If anyone starts in that particular domain, that work is going to last at least for 8 to 10 years, because it's getting just started now, right? So that's an empty slot which one can think about, correct? And once the problem is identified, it's always advisable to start as early as possible to beat the competition, right? Because many people would be thinking in a similar direction, and they will grab the idea, and then the competition gets increased. Sometimes we find that I got that idea, but which is already published, or when we are working, someone else will publish it in the meantime, right? So you have to start early and grab that. If you're late, it's better to skip that problem. Find another problem which is less clouded, right? There's a high potential to publish the research. So find another problem in that. Next comes is the problem statement, correct? So for any research, problem statement is very important. it should be focused statement about a principal research problem, right? We have to be specific as possible. Right? It should be as specific as possible. And later, based on that problem statement, we must get the objectives. So our goals must be clear. Our outcomes that we want to accomplish, that must be clear, right? Those must be clear. And then generally the objectives would be 3 to 5 objectives should define around a single problem statement. So one problem statement, once we have identified, there should be 3 to 5 objectives that we have to accomplish, right? So identifying the potential research problem statement, again, there is a list of questions to filter out, to shape the research problem statement. So first, we address the main question about the novelty. So that is the main thing, okay? And once it is identified, we have to pass our problem statement through so what test. So what test, that means, so what if I do this work, what would be the impact, right? So what if I do this work, will I be able to publish? So what if I do this work, is there any larger contribution to the research community? So that kind of questions we have to address. Once those are addressed, the next question is, does my research problem pass how and why test, right? So let's say once I figured out that I want to do this kind of research and this is my problem statement, the next question comes, how am I going to do this? What are the facilities that I need to execute and conduct that research smoothly? And why am I doing this? So why, that means these are the objectives that I have to achieve. In that way, we have to address those. And what would be the impact of my research towards the society, or maybe towards the research community, or towards the industrial contributions, or anywhere, right? So impact should be larger. If the impact is larger, research is always getting appreciated. Otherwise, there are a bunch of papers which are published and they're sitting online, maybe very little impact or contribution towards real world, right? So once it is done, the size matters a lot again. So research could be very tiny, it could be sizable, it could be anywhere. So the size of the work should be substantial, so that we can present the work through multiple publications, or at a larger size, and it should address the principal problem, right? So our research should be focused around the principal problem, right? Once these things are addressed, once we got a clarity about our work, the next thing is about the planning, right? So next thing comes around the planning. So in planning, it's a crucial stage before even we start the research, right? So performing the research and publishing, so entire thing. So we have to plan our research activities, the time should be allocated, and then we have to plan our publishing activities also. The substantial time should be allocated to the publishing activities, where we write the paper, revise the draft, again revise it, do the proofreading, review with the supervisors, review with the collaborators, and then finally we put it in the review with a journal, and so on. Subsequently, we will look at major revisions, minor revisions, rejections, all these things. So they have to be planned nicely. So it's not going to come in a day or two. It's not going to come in a month or two. It may come maybe 6 months, a year or two, in that way. So it's kind of a patience-full event. So we have to be, stick to the course of a time and then keep moving further. So it involves deep thinking about the research problem, execution of the research objectives, accomplishing the final goals, and shaping the structure of our paper, right? So once we have identified the problem statement, and that should be matched with our expectations also, from where we are doing PhD or with whom we are working. Once it is done, we have to do the allocation of a time. Let's say if I want to target one journal paper in maybe 1 year, maybe 6 months, maybe 1 year, then maybe 4 to 5 months, or maybe 6 months of research is required, rigorous research is required, and then another 6 months half would be engaged in writing, revisions, publishing activities, correct? Could include major, minor revisions, everything, rejections also. So we have to start exploring and study the relevant sources first, before once we start the research, right? So we have to start acquiring the knowledge in the field. So we have to look at the relevant sources. sometimes we have to understand the expectations also with a person with whom work, right? So we have to discuss with our supervisors and understand his or her expectations, that what are their expectations. That could be funded projects, so it cannot be go randomly in any direction. We have to stick to the funded projects objectives, right? Because sometimes the fund comes from the funded projects as a stipend, so we have to deliver the objectives which are already proposed in the funded project. So we have to discuss with the supervisors and expectations of the funding agencies or expectations of the supervisors, and accordingly, based on the instructions, we have to start doing the research, right? So that's the planning phase. Furthermore, once this is done, we have to identify the targeted journal and conferences. Even if we start research work, sometimes what happens, we just start randomly and later we find a suitable journal and conference. No, that's not a correct approach. We have to target a journal first. Let's say IEEE transaction, right? So we have to understand what is the expectation of those journals, what kind of research quality that they are expecting, what is the quality of standard that they are expecting, writing quality standards, outcomes standards, research work standards. All these things we have to understand up in the front before we start. Once we have that understanding clear, then we start the research work, so that our entire research gets in line with those expectations, and then and only then we can have Q1 sort of publications, right? So then we have to perform the research activities matching those expected quality standards. Otherwise it will go randomly, and then we would end up finding the journals which are suitable for that particular work, right? So we have to plan nicely, understand the expectations, then we have to understand the deadlines, goals, topics, everything. Then we can move further. After doing all this, the next phase is a literature review. In literature review, generally we end up reading a lot for many months, right? So that kills a time. So we have to be very specific. In the first round of a literature review, we have to employ a skimming process, right? So in skimming process, that means we identify, let's say, 50 papers or maybe 100 papers in a target domain of research area, and then we don't start reading each and every bullet or each and every thing of that paper, right? I mean, that's going to take a lot of time. Eventually we may read one or two papers, but after 2-3 papers we may end up losing the motivation, we may stop. So that's not a correct approach. What we do is we do the skimming. We look at the headings, titles, subtitles, and identify whether this paper is relevant for research or not, right? So do not read the entire paper in a first go. First, we have to filter out. We have to do the funneling first, correct? So we have to filter the target papers. So let's say if we download 100 papers, out of those, maybe 10 or 20 papers we have filtered out. Maybe 10 best papers we have filtered out, 10 or 15 papers, which are highly relevant. And we got to read only few relevant papers thoroughly. So let's say I identified 10 papers. Now I will read other papers, but quickly, not thoroughly. But 10 or 20 papers, or 10 or 15 papers, I'm going to read very thoroughly with each and every minute detail, correct? And then otherwise, I'll just quickly understand by reading the abstract, introduction, conclusion, and then I'll make it, whether the charts and tables, and I'll just see whether it's relevant or not. Correct. Once the papers are identified, I'll go and read everything in detail. Correct. Everything in detail. But during the skimming phase, we just do the skimming. We read few words. We read headings, titles. How are the charts, tables? What are the methodologies? How are the equations? And then we can get a sense whether this paper is relevant or not. So by having a thorough reading of 10 or 20 papers, I'll get the detailed knowledge of my field. Correct. Once it is done, I find that, okay, there is a substantial scope of performing research in this field. Then I will start doing the further implementation. Then I will start exploring the literature around this particular specific problem. I'll look at journal papers, conference papers, books, other reliable sources, white papers. Correct. I'll identify the unexplored area for my research, and I'll try to identify the gaps and highlight how I can contribute to cover those gaps in those papers which I was going through. Correct. And what are the new developments might require to update that particular research. Correct. Once the gaps are identified, I'll start pitching my ideas. Maybe I can maintain my handwritten journal there, and I can start pitching my ideas that these are the new developments may be required to update that existing research, which are lacks in, I mean, there are a lot of gaps in that. Correct. So we got to take important notes when reading. We got to put questions and other things, right? And collect the broader picture and narrow down the focus to a specific segment. Once we collect the broader picture and narrow down the focus to a specific segment, right? So then we go further, and when we do all this, we have to maintain the our sources from where we are reading, because many times when we read or refer something, we never maintain the sources. At the end, we do not cite them, and it results in a plagiarism, or we struggle identifying the sources later. Correct. So that's the implementation phase, that once it is done, once everything is done, you identified your methodologies, strategies, anything which you want to execute. Correct. Anything which you want to execute, those things have to be started now for a next level of implementation, which is actually actually doing the research, right? So then we start executing our ideas in the field. I mean, in the field means in the labs, or if you're doing simulations, or if you're doing mathematical modeling, if you're doing lab experiments, whatever is suitable with your field, that we start implementing them. Correct. And then we start, once the substantial outcomes are accomplished, then we start writing the research paper, right? So there are multiple phases in writing. When writing the research paper, there are multiple phases. So research paper writing is no is a marathon event. It goes continuously unless it is published, right? So we have to understand the structure of a research paper first. Correct. So generally the structure is, it includes title, affiliation, abstract, then the main body will include the real work, right? So it has introduction, literature survey, your contributions such as methodologies, algorithms, mathematical models, lab experiments, proposed experimental setups, anything, results, analytical discussions of the results, final conclusion, future scopes and references. Correct. So that would be the larger body or a structure of my research paper. Now, the tools in the writing phase, what we generally use is, people mostly use Word, or these days overleaf based latex is very friendly because multiple people can sync together and work together. It's kind of a multi-user sort of thing. So this is uh, kind of a latest edition what people use. We use overleaf, unless someone wants to use Word. Otherwise, mostly we use overleaf, and we have to understand the format required by a journal or a conference, the target format, I mean, target journal or conference formats. And according to that, we have to pick up a format and organize the text, or start building the paper in that direction. Correct. And finally, validation and proofreading, we going to enhance the English standards to the next level. And we're going to keep the plagiarism below 10%. Correct. Now, we'll look at the characteristic of a research paper. So the research paper is a piece of writing that attempts to present a focused solution to a specific research problem, right? So it should not linger around to multiple things. It should be focused around a specific problem statement, and it should address around that only, right? So generally, the focused papers are getting through very quickly under the review process and gets published. They get published very easily because they are highly focused on a specific research problem. Correct. We should not mix up too many things. Maybe one's problem statement and maybe few solutions to around that problem statement should be fine. So the center of the paper should be the problem statement what we are proposing. Okay, center of this research paper should be the problem statement what we are proposing, and it should present an in-depth study of a research question or a problem statement what we have picked up, right? And it should be original and innovative. It shouldn't be incremental, because and then it's difficult to publish it. We have to identify. So let's say if there is a solution, we have to claim the novelty. So let's say there is a gap. So then you can pitch your solution and say, this wasn't done so far through this method. It was done so far by other methods, but not by this method, right? So in that way, it becomes novel. So we have to claim the novelty, because the reviewers won't understand what is novel Now, what is the novelty factor in this part? Because once we claim and highlight it clearly, they can think in that particular direction and check, yes, this is novel, right? Then it would be easier for them also. So in support of the problem statement, a variety of sources are analyzed and cited. So we have to cite too many sources in the paper. Maybe generally a good research paper will have around 50 references. Good review paper will have around 300 references, but good research paper will have around 50 to 60 references. So that will indicate that we have researched the sources well, nicely, and those generally those sources should be high quality journals, the Q1 journals. That is also important. Citing the low quality journals may not be a good idea. Citing the high quality journal or multiple Q1 journals can give us detailed understanding and give a confidence to the reviewers also that a person who is writing this paper, he went through the quality journal papers, right? And then we have to supply with in-depth writing, which requires detailed planning and sizable research contribution. So that's the part of the implementation. Uh, we have to do a rigorous research. It should not look dull. It should not look incremental. It should be sizable. There should be a wow factor, right? So that's what that part was. Then we have to identify the scope of the paper. So generally, the scope stays around the problem statement only. It should not deviate from your problem statement. Let's say specific methodologies have been proposed around a problem statement. So let's say I got one problem statement. Around that, I have proposed 3 algorithms or 3 methodologies or 3 experimental setups. And these are the solutions to address a problem statement. There could be 3 different methods to address that particular problem statement. And avoid overfitting. We should not fit too much into one paper. Sometimes our paper goes to 50 pages, 30 pages, 20 pages. I mean, we can divide the content into multiple papers, correct? So we can have multiple of those papers, right? So that comes within rigorous practice. When writing, we have to maintain the expected quality, standard, size, and level of complexity. It should not look dull. It should not look inferior. Right, so we have to maintain the typical expectations. So that's why looking at the papers, Q1 journal papers is the first part, because we have to understand the expectation, right? And that finally the English should be at the next standard. These days English is not a huge trouble because we got a lot of AI based tools which we can use to improve the English standards. We can have the advanced vocabulary. If you are not a native speaker, I mean, we are naturally not the native speakers, so it's difficult for us to cope up with that. So in that case, we can identify some of the collaborators, those who are good in English. They can edit the script, and we can share the collaboration. We can publish the collaborated work. That is also a good idea, right? So generally people do that for a collaboration. Journal and conference selection is very important, because based on that target journal and conference only, we can identify the scope of the paper, right? So our paper should match the expectation of the journal first. Otherwise they're going to reject it immediately, or we end up fitting the journals for the inferior works at the end. So if we start randomly, then we identify the journals, right? So generally we go in a reverse direction. We set up the journal target first, that we want to publish in these 2 journals, 3 journals only, right? Not randomly in any other journals. So then research scholars will be looking into those directions only. They read those kind of journal papers only, not any and every paper, right? Maybe IEEE transactions sort of, or maybe good journals. So in that way they define the scope, and they look at the published papers in that particular journal or conference, right? So let's say Globecom, or maybe any journal, standard journal or conference in your field, in our field. So they'll look at the existing papers in that, and then they'll try to understand and try to execute that research, maintaining the similar quality standard, even during the research execution, even during writing the research paper, right? And when we write the research paper, we should think as reviewers think, because we have to think what they are going to think, right? So if we think it before, we may not face that much of rigorous rejections later. We may face revisions. That is okay. Whether it goes to the reviewer, he's going to put his contributions, he's going to give the review comments, which is okay. But the rejection phases can be reduced. So always go for a peer review with your maybe senior researchers, mentors, supervisors, collaborators. So that's always a good idea, because we can give them a script and ask them what they think about the script. Is it looking inferior? Are there any suggestions to overcome them? This and that, right? So those kind of things we have to do. And the consequences of incorrect decision. So let's say if we don't follow the correct path, then what's going to happen is it's going to be resulting in a loss of time, or maybe a failure to publish, right? So it's better to plan well to avoid the consequences such as loss of time and failure to publish. So that's why this is very important. Now everything is done. Now once we enter the writing phase, outlining is very important. The structure of the paper has to be decided nicely. So when we start writing, let's say entire research has been conducted, we got the outcomes, we have everything. Now we want to organize our thoughts. Before we commence writing research paper, right, we have to make a clear-cut outline of our paper. That we have to look at the entire information flow. We have to ensure that nothing is forgotten. So we can create the outline on my research problem, and we can list out all these sections, subsections, the bullets of the content, that in this particular section, subsection, I'll enter this. So entire outline, entire structure of a research should be ready, correct? And when the structure outlines is ready, it will enable us to organize our ideas when we start actually writing them without forgetting anything. So that's the advantage, right? And when we enter, after the outline is fixed, when we enter the writing phase, it would be even easier, because the information flow would go through, very in a smoother phase, because we have a complete outline thought already, right? And then it would be an enjoyable phase that we can start writing the research paper, right? So generally many researchers, they prefer to write the main body first. And it's a good advisable idea, because see, abstract, introduction and conclusion can be done later also, because the main body is written first, and based on that overhead can be done later also, right? So generally it's a good idea to start with the main body of the paper. That means it generally includes uh, main sections like methodologies, algorithms, mathematical models, experimental tests, setups, proposed design, system models, right? Then subsequently results, discussions, etc. And then over that we can build our abstract, conclusion, introduction, and other things later, right? So, and when we do all this, we have to look at the page limit and word count first, because most of the journal these days, they are coming with some sort of page limit, and above that there is a heavy page charge or open access fees, right? So just to be at a safer side, or to reduce these number of pages or word count, we have to be conscious about what we write. Or it can be cut short later also in the second revision, which is fine, but we should be aware about this. So we have to see how much do we want to cover in a single paper, because we don't want to cover everything in a single paper. It can be split into the multiple paper, and these charges can be optimized. So we should not put everything into a single paper. We can publish multiple articles and cut down these charges and other things, right? If it is matching the expectations in quality. So when this is done, then we start doing our first draft, which will transform our ideas into the writing, correct? And discusses each and every point that we are turning. No, we are turning our preliminary ideas into the argument, right? They may not be perfectly formulated in the first draft, which is fine. When we write our first draft, it wouldn't be so organized, which is okay. Uh, it may not be perfectly formulated, which is fine. But slowly, we can build the first draft, and then we can once we have a momentum, we can write down and perfect it later, right? And when writing the first draft, we should not get hung up at a particular specific difficulty. No, we should not lose the momentum when we are writing the first draft. We have to be consistent and keep moving, because the things can be reorganized later in the second revision also. When we write the first draft, we should express ourselves very clearly, that what are we thinking, and what are the ideas that we want to write down. right? And we should try to write clearly and concisely. We should try to write clearly and concisely. This is something we can improve later, right? So the understanding part is very important. Whatever we write, we should understand and write it clearly and concisely. We can improve the text later, or we can add the content, delete the content. Based on the suitability, we can do all those things. But it's also important that things are clear to us when we come back to them, right? So we can write them right now, but it shouldn't be like that, that when we come back to that, we are not able to understand those things. And then so that's why it is better. And generally, when writing, we should be flexible. We shouldn't be rigid, because we may have to make the adjustments to our plans, even to our structure, right? When we go further, we find the loopholes, and we have to go back and change it. When we go further, we find few more loops, so we have to go back and change it. So it doesn't have to be set in the stone. We can keep coming back, and we can keep doing the things, and we should cite the sources. Cite the sources. That means at least we should keep a track of all the sources from where which one is taken, right? So maybe we can maintain a note when we write it down. So later we can cite it, a full citation. We can do that, right? Even if there are any quoted text or paraphrase sources, we'll have to cite them nicely to avoid the plagiarism. And we may want to perfect our citations later, which is fine, but it's worth getting the basic drawn right now itself. So such as, let's say, we can just take a name of the author and maybe a little bit of title, so that we can, when we go back and when we format it later, we can do it nicely, right? There are online citation generators are available these days, so we need not to struggle with them also. We can just take a note, and at the end we can generate the citations online. Such as, let's say, IEEE transactions, they give, when we click on cite this, they give a full citation, right? Even BibTeX file also is available for LaTeX, right? So it's not a trouble these days, it's easy, right? So the core idea for a research and writing is the developing of a reading habit. That is most important part. We should have a reading habit, because when we read, we get the ideas, and then we write. We read, get the ideas, and write, right? So then we can, when reading, we can write it down. So let's say, in between, if you're not thinking, if you're not able to think something, we can go to the relevant research paper or method, and then from that we can read, and then we can establish our writing. So generally, get the habit of reading, right? That is very good. Now see, these days the information is vast, correct? So we cannot keep taking the hard copies and read. That's the major bottleneck. We cannot take 100 papers hard copy and keep carrying them, as a burden. So always, it's advisable to read the soft copies instead of the hard copies. See, reading the soft copies is like, pretty much very compact. You can just put that in the laptop, right? It's carry anywhere. We can edit through PDF editor. We can highlight them forever. We can save them, put it on a drive. See, another one is hard copies. We cannot do the Control F sort of things, right? We can do the search thing in PDF very quickly, very easily. That will save us a lot of time when reading. Whereas in hard copy, you have to keep doing, keep seeing the things, search it. It takes half a day sometimes to search the material. Where in these soft copies, it just take few seconds. Control F, enter the terminology, and then we're there, right? And we can access anywhere through the drive, Google Drive, or maybe whatever is your choice, maybe pen drive, Google Drive, laptop, local memory, correct? So carrying hard copy of, let's say, 100 papers is not feasible, just not feasible. So most of the students, they have this barrier in the initial stage. It takes 6 to 8 months for them to go over with that, right? Still they do that, but eventually they'll also realize that it's not possible, because not reading handful papers is fine, but when we want to read 100 or 200 papers, when we are writing a review paper, it's not just possible. So we got to go digital, right? So, and in parallel, when we read, we can take the notes in the online. Notes means everything is digital, okay? Not with a pen and paper. So we can take the notes by sticky notes on the PDF. We can underline it, we can mark it, and all these things will stay forever there in that particular file, and then we can keep reading them. So that's about the reading. Now, as a research scholar or as a publishing, we have to exploit our sources very nicely, very efficiently. See, if we exploit our sources very nicely, very efficiently, they'll contribute towards our publication. So the first and foremost source is the professors or faculty members under which we work, right? So other scholars, your colleagues, correct? experienced scholars. I mean, experienced scholars. Okay, I mean, we have to select the people wisely here, because we want to select the people from whom we get the motivation, not the demotivation. So the other scholars, right? Those who can help us. We can build network of research scholars. We can build the social media networks also for through the research from framing the research groups. Q&A portals are also good. You can put the questions and questions there, ask your queries, everything, they'll reply. Correct. There would be software hardware support teams also. If you are engaged in software hardware, let's say we are doing some sort of hardware, we are stuck somewhere, do not hesitate, immediately write an email to the hardware support team. They'll come back through a reply, right? Then we can save some sort of time. If we have a software issue, let's write an email to the software team. They'll come back with a solution. So that's how we can use. There are virtual writer tutors are available. Okay, virtual writer tutors that means such as, let's say, Grammarly, WordTune, Quillboards. There are too many virtual writer tutors available where we can feed the text and they'll teach us virtually that, okay, this is the paragraph, these are the missing keys, this is the rewritten phrase, paraphrased material. Take a look. Apart from that, we can look at the videos, other things also to enhance our writing skills. Correct. There would be content tutors also. All those things will be there. Uh, this is most important. Model research paper. Correct. So we always target a journal, and then we try to say the scholars that, okay, you pick up 3 model research papers, which would be kind of a role models for you, and then try to stay nearby that and go. I mean, try to achieve that standard, right? So that would be an excellent thought. Another one is generally I used to read the profile of the other researchers. How are they doing? What are they doing? What am I missing with it, right? And what are the gaps between us? How can we improve? So those kind of motivational sources are there. We can always subscribe for the Google Scholar alerts. So if they publish anything, we get it. We get an alert and we can see, okay, how is the research going on? We get it. We keep updating ourselves, and then we keep everything is positive. We keep motivation, right? We take motivation, and then we can also move ourselves or lift ourselves behind them. That's the idea. ResearchGate is also an excellent platform to follow relevant researchers for their updates, right? So this is also an excellent platform which we can follow. Once these things are done, we start with the title. Correct. So generally, the title should be in such so that it reflects the entire work. And it shouldn't be like a paragraph in a title, right? People will come with four lines of title. I mean, it shouldn't be a paragraph. We're not writing a paragraph. We can write those things in abstract or main body of the paper. You write it right there, not in the title. Title should be as least as crisp as possible. It should be concise and impactful. It should reflect the entire research work. A reader, when someone reads a title, he should be able to make out whether he should go into that particular article, rest of the article, or not. So that's how it should be. And generally, the precise length of a title is around 12 words, maybe 15 words max, 2 lines max, right? That's the ideal one. So, such as, let's say, these two are the examples of attractive titles. Let's say, machine learning oriented, dynamic cost factor based routing in communication networks. Second title example is, let's say, recent progresses in surface plasmonic resonance based sensors, a comprehensive review, right? So just 2 lines titles, and it'll immediately says that, see, machine learning oriented dynamic cost factor based routing has been studied here, right? Here it says that it's a clear cut indication that it's a review paper on plasmon resonance based sensors, right? So surface plasmon resonance based sensors. So it's a review paper on other sensors, correct? So this gives a clear cut idea to the reader about what they have to see throughout the paper. The next important phase is authors. So generally, the authors, all authors and co-authors have to be included here with their affiliations and orders, right? So it depends on the publisher. They'll have different formats, so we have to adhere to those formats. Such as, let's say, this paper, these are the 3 authors, right? So after the title, all the co-authors have to be placed here, and then in the subsequent line there would be the affiliation, and the other things will come up here. Once this is done, we're going to go with the abstract. Now here, abstract, generally there would be a word limit. Let's say 200 words or 250 words. That should be the ideal one. Maybe sometimes it's like 250 words or 300 words. Mostly it would be around 250 words. But it should be crisp and impactful, right? It should highlight the complete work. It should be able to give the projection of the entire research, what we are presenting in that paper, right? And it should briefly give us the picture of our all contributions. So let's say if I'm proposing one system model, two methods or two methodologies, I should say these are the novel methodologies for a specific problem statement that I'm proposing under this work. And this I have to put it in the abstract. And I should claim the novelty here also, that these two methodologies have never been executed on this problem statement, that which is why as per the author's best of knowledge, that's the novelty, right? So that's how we have to write. So here you can say the methods, if you're proposing algorithms, maybe if you're proposing some sort of experimental setups, anything, right, based on your research work. And once this is done, the final pinnacle points of your results, your findings, outcomes, they can be discussed in terms of numbers, maybe in a single or two lines, not too much of in a stretched manner, but in a single or two lines, right? So the final results, finding the outcomes, they can be discussed in terms of numbers here in short. So let's say generally, let's say I am proposing a methodology or algorithm. So we can say the proposed methodology / algorithm inferred 10% improvement over the existing methods, right? So you can see the proposed methodology or algorithm, where we can place our actual name of the methodology or algorithm, and then we say that 12% improvement over the existing methods. So which says that my method is better than the existing one and beating them by 12%, correct? So it should be a conclusive comment here in short, maybe one or two lines. After the story part, after the the proposed work has been explained, this should be the closure of the abstract. The next section after the abstract is the introduction. Okay, so generally introduction start with a story that what the article is about, and it'll introduce the research problem, accompanying with the key terms and ideas, right? And why is our research important? That should be mentioned here clearly. We'll have to explain the readers that what's the novel insights here that we are offering in this current article. Right? We have to claim novelty because people won't know what's a novelty, right? So generally they'll say what's the novel thing in this. So up in the front we have to claim that this part is novel because as per our best of knowledge it wasn't done by anyone. So and that's why we are pitching and proposing that this is the novel thing. So always claim the novelty, maybe at the end of the introduction through the contributions, right? And we have to pitch a story, and we'll have to build that how are we going to make our arguments here. And it should be a brief introduction about the existing research trend, what's going on in the market, or what's going on a specific problem trend. Then we have to address the opportunities, limitations, and there are any challenges. They have to be placed here. And detailed, we're going to place the detailed literature survey. Right? So see, once this is built up, the story is built up, opportunities, limitations, challenges are built up. Now then we have to say, okay, this was the work done in last 3 to 5 years. We should not go 10 years old or 20 years old, generally 3 to 5 years old duration. I mean, within 3 to 5 years, whatever the published papers are, mostly in last 3 years, sometimes last 3 to 5 years, but last 3 years is more preferable. So focus on last 3 years papers, survey them. And then we have to identify and clearly mention that other researchers have contributed in the recent years on a specific research problem. Then you got to identify the research gaps, and then we have to place our research contributions here. What's the importance of our contribution there, right? We got to convince the readers, specifically the reviewers. Now, reviewer could be, specifically could be a supervisor also. That if the supervisor is not convinced then definitely reviewers won't be convinced because correct. So convince the readers that our paper presents a novel and essential research contribution. If we are not able to, if we fail to convince the readers, it's not going to go through ever. It will go through maybe low quality journal, but not the high quality journal. And generally what happens that after some point of time, we end up losing the motivation and we just push it to the low quality of journal, right? So that's the trouble. So give a quick summary of the structure. So after this is done, end of the introduction, give a quick summary of the structure or organization of rest of the paper. So here you can say that subsequent section number 2 presents maybe system model. Subsequent section number 3 presents all the proposed algorithms or methods. Section number 4 may present results and discussion or analytical discussions. Section number 5 may conclude the article, and section number 6 gives the acknowledgements, and subsequently we get the references, right? So that would be the structure of my that would be my introduction part. Now after introduction, the next important part comes is the main body of the research paper. So when we present the main body of the research paper, it will have several sections and subsections. Okay, so generally it would be divided into multiple sections and subsections. Each will cover a specific idea connected with a specific problem or problem statement what we have picked up, right? We got to ensure that the information presented is completely in a logical order, and it should maintain a continuous flow. It should not go disconnected anywhere. See, once we finish one section, we initiate the next section. That should be a built up in between. It should not look disconnected. It should not start abruptly. It should go in a coherent manner, right? So the reader shouldn't get disturbed. It should enjoy when he rolls over from one section to another one, correct? Otherwise he's not going to go through it, and eventually the reviewers will end up rejecting it, or maybe our supervisor may get irritated and he'll give us rewriting. So I mean, that's why this kind of things are good. And it includes pieces of evidences, arguments to support our research problem, maybe charts or other things, or maybe any findings or evidence or proofs of our research, right? So all these things should be there in the main body. Apart from that, could be a system model. This may include a comprehensive block diagram, right, of the entire proposed design, or you can say design, or people call it system model, or maybe experimental diagram, something. I mean, whatever we see fit, right, based on our research work. Then subsequently, all the methodologies, what we have executed to address the problem statement, what we have worked out throughout the research, or maybe if there are algorithms, if it's a computer-oriented field, if there are any programs we are writing, then we can give the pseudocodes or mathematical equations or anything else, right? Mathematical models, theorems, proofs, those kind of things. Experimental setups, if we are doing any physical experiments in the lab, block diagrams of those experiments, pictures, etc., etc. Subsequently, once this is built up, we'll have to do a detailed explanation about our work, right? What we have done so far in that. So each and everything has to be explained in detail with flowcharts, pseudocodes, figures, and tables, and etc. whatnot, right? So this is the heart of it, correct? So along with the text, this will add a value. So we got to make a value addition before we put our final script to the publisher, correct? The structured section of the structure of sections and subsections. Generally, we have to follow the structured outline. We got to keep our writing focused on the specific research problem statement what we picked initially, right? So we cannot go randomly here and there. We have to go in a typical structured form, and then we can keep building the section and subsection impactfully. So generally, when we select the headings, they must be impactful. Each and every heading or subheading should highlight what's there in that particular subsection or section, right? So that reader gets a clear-cut idea about what's there in that particular section and subsection, whether it's worth to read it further. It will help reviewers also to quickly guess what's there in that subsection and subsection, right? So heading must be concise, and they must introduce a preliminary or primary content of that particular section or subsection. It must be impactful, correct? and it must be impactful so that it will enable readers to recognize the direction promptly, that what they are going to read in that particular next section or subsection. We should establish that effectively, and the transition from one section to another or from section to subsection, right, is very important. We shouldn't be abrupt. It should not start abruptly immediately, and it should not look disconnected. That it should not be kind of a long para, 4 pages. It should break in between in time. There should be some sort of built-up story in between so that it takes a reader from a smooth transition, right? So this is very important. And when we write this, we can use the advanced vocabularies such as, let's say, because, moreover, however, furthermore, firstly, secondly, on one hand, on another hand, this and that, right? So these are advanced writing skills what generally people see. So generally we can have a toolkit where all these attractive phrases we can store it. Generally thesaurus.com is very good on this, or WordTune is also very good on this. It helps us to build this kind of text very, very nicely. Grammarly also does it, and there are Quillbold also does it. There are many tools available so that you can explore, right? Now the writing is kind of a long-term skill development. It won't come in a day or two. It won't come in a month or two. It's kind of a consistent writing. We keep writing, we keep learning. We keep writing, we keep learning. More we write, more we explore. More we write, more we explore, right? So that's how it's going to go. So there is no end to it. There is no end to it. So we keep going it. After that, the next section is results and discussions. Generally, this is after the main body. This is a second most important part of the research paper, and it should not go dull. We should provide substantial figures, tables, pie charts. Now there should be a content also. I mean, people will fill up the figures, but there would be only one curve on one chart. They'll put 10 curves. I mean, they'll put 10 different figures for 10 curves. I mean, put one figure with one chart with 5 curves in one figure, and then make it more sizable. Figures should be more sizable. I mean, it should have a heavy content or substantial content so that reader will understand. Okay, one figure does it, and save the space also, because we have to look at the page limit and other things also. It should include tables, pie charts, etc. I mean, whatever can help you to present your work, right? So figures, tables, experimental setups, diagrams, the picture, simulation windows, snapshots, graphs, bar charts, etc. Whatever you feel, whatever you see fit, right? So whatever you see fit there, that can be presented here. Analytical expression of our research. See, whatever the results are coming, we have to explain them nicely. So generally what happens that we discuss generally the trend, which is something, looks very dull, because when we discuss the result, we should infer the analytical points, the outcomes, the key points which we are observing, along with the numbers we must discuss. We should not discuss the general terms of the graphs. When we discuss the results, we should discuss, and it should be supported by the numbers. It should be supported by the inferences. It should be supported by the key points through the analytical skills which we are extracting. It should have some sort of comparative statements with the existing studies. Sometimes we can beat ourselves by placing some sort of conclusive points, right? We can say our method number 2 is beating the method number 1 by, let's say, 5%, correct? So those kind of things. We should present tabular results, summarizing everything, right? We should present strength and limitations of our study. What are the strengths, what are the limitations, and other things. If there are any implications of findings that we have to present here, that we can put them here. If there are any other findings which people have to know of our study, that we can put them. And sometimes we do everything, but we do not put the high resolution figures. That's a major trouble. So we have to maintain the high resolution figures. We have to maintain the aspect ratio tight. So all these things can give us a next level to the article, and it goes through very nicely. Abbreviations is very important. So let's say abbreviations, most of the times we forget. We use the abbreviated terms and we forget to define, right? So if we are, let's say, frequently using any term, we should define it, and we should reuse that defined term, abbreviated term. That will save us the space. Furthermore, Let's say here, I'm using mobile routing very frequently in a paper. So I have defined it as MR. And I'll reuse it now MR in a subsequent paper. Now this will save me a lot of space also. But we have to double check sometimes. We use the abbreviated term, but we do not define. Now that's sort of, it should be checked, cross-checked. There shouldn't be a single term undefined in the paper. Now it should be checked at the end when we upload the paper. Before that few days, the final proofreading should clear this up. Generally, when an abbreviated term comes first in the abstract, it should be defined first, and then it can be reused subsequently in the abstract. Now, again, if a same abbreviated term comes in the introduction, when the same term comes subsequently from the introduction onwards, it must be redefined. And then subsequently, we can use the same abbreviated term. Now, why? One can argue, I have defined an abstract. Why am I supposed to redefine after the introduction onwards? The reason behind this is most of the journals which are not open access, they'll just put the abstract in a public domain. Correct? So that's why this goes separately there. And then subsequently, again, the introduction body is again taken separately. Correct? So that's why it should be redefined there after the introduction section always. So let's say if mobile routing comes in the abstract first, we must define that and reuse it. And when we will have to redefine first in abstract, we got to do it, and subsequently we can do that for the introduction, and then we can reuse it, right? So those two differences we must always do that, and there must be a separate round of proofreading and in that round, don't do anything, just the abbreviations. Correct? Generally, we do in this way. That we call it abbreviation proofreading. We don't do anything. We don't read anything, not a single other word, just the abbreviations, and we ensure that there is not a single abbreviation left undefined. Right? That's what we always do. Once this is done, the final conclusion point, right? So the conclusion should be impactful, same as the abstract, and it should include the brief of our research contributions. Right? So all the inferences points have to be placed here. It should clearly say what were our contributions. It should be impactful and conclusive. It should show the comparative strength of our research with others, the existing methods, and show how our research outcomes are beating them. We should discuss always in terms of the numbers here also. Maybe one line with few numbers, because others are not going to do that. So we got to make a difference here, right? So if you give just one line number, let's say my method gave 12% of improvement compared to the other traditional methods. Sufficient. Just one or two numbers with one line. That will make a difference, right? Of a final outcome. We don't want to do entire research studies with numbers here. Just one pinnacle point. That's fine. If there are any limitations of our research, we can put them here, and then one line of scope, if you want to say, that can be addressed in this way, but we haven't addressed that, and someone else can do that. Acknowledgement section is very important when there is a funding agency, right? Never forget to give a grant number, because otherwise how we are going to report that funding agency, and next time they'll not give the funding if you don't do that. So that's very important. If you are using any software, evaluation softwares, let's say a software company gave us a demo tool for a month, we worked on it. To avoid the conflict of interests, always give the evaluation, always give the acknowledgement, so that we avoid the conflicts of interest there. If any person has helped or supported throughout the research working, and the work contribution is not sizable, I said work contribution is not sizable. If it is sizable, it should be a co-author. If it's not sizable, then we can put him in an acknowledgement. Let's say if someone has given an access to a lab computer, or maybe experimental setup for a while, then we can put those people in the acknowledgement and give them something. If that contribution is sizable, they must be in the co-author, right? Otherwise, it goes in as an unethical practice, right? Finally, the references and citations. These are the most important points. Most of the reviewers will watch or read what are the references. Is he reading the low quality journal papers? Is he reading the high quality journal papers? So this is very important. We always read the references. We always ensure that when we refer the research paper, they should be Q1 journals, and all the references, they must be cross-checked. One proofreading only for the references, everything. These days, the overleaf does it nicely. The cross-checking the numbers is not a trouble unless we are using Word, right? But overleaf does it nicely. LaTeX does it nicely. So what we have to see if there is any missing information or anything. That's what we have to just see. It must be, in the order as per the journals or conferences required format. Sometimes, let's say the table numbers are not matching, figure numbers are not matching, right? When we refer to the text, that's what we have to cross check everything, that each and every figure number, equation number, table number is matched throughout the paper. Cross check all the references, cited one, listed one, they must exactly match. Referencing format must be as per the publisher's requirement. There would be a predefined format. We get to cross check it. It varies journal to journal. Generally, this would be the format for IEEE journals, but it depends on Springer or Wiley, or it depends on a journal. So we get to see that. And generally, LaTeX format should be fine for that particular journal. It does it automatically. Only thing we have to see if there is any missing information, maybe volume number, issue number, page numbers, month or year, something, maybe name of the publisher. Those things we have to just look at this nicely. Consistently, we have to capitalize each word if you are doing it. If you don't do it, that's okay. But if you do it consistently, we have to capitalize each number, each alphabet of the word, and then we have to see all the names are consistent in the same pattern. Everything. This is very important. Most of the students ignore this, and most of the reviewers will start from here. Right, so that's the difference. So that's how we have to do. And once the first draft is ready, this is the major part. Plagiarism, any kind of copying, stealing, right? So it'll go immediately rejected, and there are a lot of consequences we will see tomorrow. Also plagiarism, we have this kind of detailed session tomorrow to build the awareness on the plagiarism. So we got to bring the plagiarism down below 10%. Generally 10% is the best idea. People go with 20%, which is fine. That's their understanding, but generally we prefer around 10%. 15% is also fine. So Turnitin does it nicely. There are other tools also. The only trouble is copyright infringements on images. It doesn't catch the images, right? So this supervisor should be very careful with their students, because most of the students will copy paste, they'll cite it. That's not sufficient. They have to redraw with the contributions, right? So sometimes we get caught up in this, and then there is a copyright strike, and it looks pretty much odd to address those kind of things, right? If you reuse it, we gotta take the written license permission from a publisher. Right, we have to see CC by 4.0. That's called Creative Commons by 4.0 license. If it is in that domain, we can reuse it, cite it. If it is a paid image, we have to pay the image charges, and then only then we can reuse it. If we are taking any image, we got to redraw it with our own contributions, and rewrite the relevant text, and then cite the referred one. Consequences: text plagiarism can easily be detected, but images are a bit tricky. So images, diagrams, so we have to just be careful. So any image, we have to redraw it first. We have to take a license permission from the particular publisher, and then if there are any charges have to be paid, we have to pay. Otherwise, there would be a negative impact, and our paper may get straight away rejected. Plus, there are subsequent consequences of the plagiarism if it is not taken seriously, and if you are at a bigger place, right? I mean, at a smaller place, nothing will happen sometimes, but at a bigger place, it may be taken at a next serious level, and that could be some sort of serious consequences we will discuss tomorrow. And if it is found repeatedly, sometimes the publisher may impose a penalty or ban on the authors from uploading the papers. So that's one thing. The next part is revision before submission. We must revise the entire draft multiple times, and each and every so before we submit the final manuscript to our supervisor or guide, even make sure that we have revised at least 2 times. Correct? We should not go with a draft that, okay, I mean, that's my draft, take a look. He'll get irritated, right? And I don't know what we'll do after that, right? So at least 2 times it has to be revised, and at each and every iteration I have to bring the quality higher by at least 15%. It shouldn't be just, okay, I went through it, now I'm done. No, and there should be an improvement at least 10 to 15% in terms of English, in terms of organization of the paper, in terms of arranging the paper, correct, eliminating or cutting short number of pages. If the abstract is oversized, it should be cut short. If the main body is oversized, it should be cut short. Cut down the irrelevant content, cut down the dull content, keep the relevant things. It should line up around the problem statement. Check, is there anything, are we forgetting, is there any missing point, everything. It should be written clearly. And no, we have to improve that very nicely, because otherwise there shouldn't be any ambiguous paragraphs and any ambiguous explanations which are not clearer, which need more evidence proofs. Give them, correct. It should not be too lengthy. It should not be. It should be crisp also, nicely. We can write multiple papers of them. We can cut down them, save it for later, right? I mean, we can publish multiple papers of out of one. Why you want to put everything in that? It shouldn't be too short also. It shouldn't be too short also that it doesn't meet the expected quality standards, right? It should not look very dull. If additional work is required after writing the first draft, most of the cases, once we write the first draft, we'll come to know that work is not sufficient. Then we must go and work again, right? And put more outcomes, put more methods, which is fine. But it should not look dull. So take a careful look for your first draft and find out the area of improvements. Be mentally prepared and do whatever it takes to improve, right? So generally that's the idea. Sometimes we restructure it. So in that case, we have to be flexible and restructure it. Sometimes we have to restructure the outlines. I'll outline also in such so that it adds a value. So these are the paragraphs or points of revision before the submissions. We got to cut down all the irrelevant content. Avoid repetition. There shouldn't be a single information repeated, right? So avoid all repetitions and other things. We got to prioritize the most significant changes first. Once the first draft is evaluated, we can start executing the transformations, right? And start with the most significant change in the content composition, which has a knock-on effect, right? So let's say if I start rewriting the things, I have to think that, okay, this is the most important part, which I have to rewrite first. We start from there, so we don't lose the motivation, right? Reorder the information, which is fine. Keep reordering it, reformulating the things if it is adding the value, if it is going to the next level, right? We have to be more clear and more substantial. Presenting the information in a different order, which is also fine. If the earlier order is not making sense or it doesn't create an impact, we should think differently, and we can cut, we can add. We should be flexible. Do whatever it takes. We should be doing that. Whatever suits there, we should do that, and we should overcome all the psychological barriers or pushbacks. If you want to publish to the high quality of journals and conferences, right, there would be multiple psychological barriers. We have to overcome everything. We should never hesitate to restore something back if the newer version doesn't work. So let's say if we have screwed up in the revision phase, correct, and we find that the new editions are not working, or it doesn't make sense, then we can fall back to the original version and do that. Finally, editing, proofreading includes, we gotta fix all the typos, spelling errors. Now, these days, Grammarly does it nicely, but however, we can do it once manually, a final check. Check if there are any missing words, confusing words, punctuation errors, missing or excess spaces, capitalization, formatting, referencing. See, sometimes we do the capitalization in an inappropriate way. Some of the words are capitalized, some of them are not. It should be consistent everywhere. It should be formatted nicely. All referencing should be formatted nicely. You can ask the question, have you used all terms which we define consistently throughout the paper, right? So if you define one term, it should be consistently used somewhere throughout the paper. And all the numbers which are mentioned in the abstract and conclusion, they must match with the text, figures, tables, and main body of the paper. See, now that's the hookup, right? I mean, when we mention a number in the abstract and conclusion, the person will go back to the main body or figures and tables and check it, cross-check it. Now, if they don't match, the game is over. So we have to be consistent, cross-check all the numbers. There is no error, no typo. That could be possible. One more zero is added. Sometimes, let's say 0.002. I may put 0.0002, right? So one more zero is added. So this kind of things have to be overcome. All citations must be matching. with the exact numbers with the reference list. References must be properly formatted. The entire document must be formatted. Syntax, grammar, everything should be checked. This days grammar is not a headache. Grammarly, or maybe no, there are too many tools, so it's not a headache. So that's fine. Look at the text very closely. Resolve any grammar issues, clarity issues. Go sentence by sentence. Read each and every word again and again and again. Right? Don't leave a single word. Raise the standard of English to the next level. Next level. Use thesaurus. Use alternate phrases. Use Grammarly. Use Quillbolt. I mean, there are too many. Whatnot. You can find your tools online. Right? Use advanced words. Eliminate all preliminary words. In first draft, you will write preliminary words, which is fine. Use advanced vocabulary when we go to the next draft. Correct? Combine all smaller and primitive sentences to the complex ones. Right? Uh, there should not be two small sentences. They should be combined nicely. There should not be very large sentences. We should cut down them into the medium ones. Right? Clarify all technical ambiguities. Person shouldn't find any technical glitches in the paper during the text reading. Right? Request your colleagues, supervisors to review once and ask them to give the comments before you do the final submission to the journal. Right? Now, see, sometimes English is not my native language. That's not going to be a valid argument here. Reviewers are going to reject it. So find a person who has a better English, not a spoken English, written English, okay, from the publication point of view. So reviewers will not wish to review your paper if it's not readable nicely, right? So they'll straight away say poor English, not written nicely, reject it, right? See, some of the characteristic of dull paper will quickly see and close it up. Dull paper will lack in focus, will lack in originality, will lack in novelty. It will be too short without matching the expected size. It will be very lengthy, unorganized. Lack of reasoning in the main body, a lack of sufficient literature survey, right? Lack of strong outcomes, lack of impactful presentation or scientific data through figures, tables, block diagrams, pseudocodes, drawings, mathematical diagrams, experimental diagrams, etc. Lack of sufficient numbers in the discussions. Generally, the research general trends are discussed without any numbers. That this is increasing, this is decreasing. It's not going to help, right? A lack of analytical explanations, discussing general trends without supplying the numbers, not providing the comprehensive study with the existing work, or and proving how is the current work better than the others, right? So not sufficient things are supplied. Undefined abbreviations. The numbers which are referred, or the figure numbers, table numbers, reference numbers are not matching. Right? Generally, we use LaTeX or Overleaf to avoid this, which is fine. Cited numbers, references, they are also not matching. This can be overcome through the LaTeX, right? So now, once let's say we have uploaded the paper, there would be the revisions. So when there could be a minor revision or major revision after a month or two. Now, how are we going to address those? Correct. So remember, reviewers are always right. When revising the paper, try to address all the points which they are asking. Correct? Do not respond so quickly. Understand the reviewers very nicely, what they're trying to say, what they're trying to ask, what they're trying to put in those comments. And we have to understand them and revise as much as possible, satisfying all the comments. Now, lot of rebuttaling will lead to the rejection. We can rebuttal for few points, which is fine, but a lot of rebuttaling will lead to the rejection. So always we have to be in sync with the rejections. And finally, let's say if the paper is rejected, then don't use the heart. That's the key part. Any paper, first time it's going to be rejected. So that's the natural thing. So we should not lose the heart in that. And the first attempt it's going to be rejected always. I mean, unless a person is kind of a genius, and then I don't want to segregate anything here, but unless it's an excellent draft prepared very nicely after a lot of years of experience, then in that case it may go through. But the first draft, a vanilla student, when he enters a PhD or maybe master's, his first draft is going to be rejected. So then we have to carefully analyze reviewers' comments, build our understanding, revise the paper, enhance the quality, and then put it through the other journal. We can take a proactive look look at what have I missed, any missing things, enhance the paper quality, work quality, and then upload it to a news journal or conference, and then get it through, right? So if correct, so never lose the heart in that. And finally, the key point is to keep doing the things again and again, again and again. It's a slow process. So that's all I got for a day. If you have questions, we can open the bridge for question and answers and comments. And thank you very much for listening. Longer talk. That's all I got, and we'll close it.